I'd like to call this meeting to order, this regular City Council work session of Tuesday, November 7th. The clerk will call the roll.
Mayor Wolcott,
Here.
Councilmember Duffy,
Here.
Councilmember Hall,
Here.
Councilmember Remley,
Here.
Vice Mayor Tandy,
Here.
Councilmember Winters,
Here.
Councilmember Hayden.
Councilmember Hayden is excused.
Thank you.
All right, and if you'll all please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have any call to the public?
Yes, we do. We have one. David Dobler.
Good evening. Mr. Doppler, if you would just identify yourself for the record.
My name is Dave Dobler.
Dobler.
And that's all right. I live at 12436 North 153rd Ave in Surprise. Good afternoon, Mayor Wolcott and Council. I'm a registered architect, professionally licensed since 1989. I moved into a 2013 built residence in Marley Park in December of 2016. In June of 2017, when the heat set in, the front rooms of the house were 10 to 15 degrees hotter than the thermostat temperature, even with the AC going full blast. The background I have in mechanical systems design and the building type I specialized in, which is microelectronics cleanroom fabs, told me something was amiss. I therefore obtained the sealed and approved plans from the City of Surprise public record on June 7th, 2017, to examine the mechanical plans. Subsequently, I have found 22 distinct, unapproved, and unpermitted HVAC field changes that were made to the sealed approved and building permitted contract documents, the plans, the specifications, and the calcs, that across the board downsized the HVAC system of my house in both equipment size and capacities. The system was installed from 8.5 by 11 subcontractor installer diagrams at the time of building, not from the sealed, approved, permitted plans and specifications. These unapproved changes were not identified by City of Surprise building inspection, yet final approval was issued for the home and I ultimately bought it. There's a major disconnect between the system as designed in the sealed, approved, permitted plans and the system that was installed from the 8.5 by 11 diagrams. The mechanical design data from the 8.5 by 11 diagrams is completely different than the design data for the sealed, approved, permitted plans, and the system installed is completely different than the system as it was designed and approved by the City of Surprise. I've been discussing this issue at length and in great detail since June 7th of 2017 with City of Surprise Development Services Department, both plan review and building inspection, the general contractor, the original architect, the original mechanical designer and subcontractor, and 2 independent AC companies. Most recently, on October 16th, 2017, I sent these specific findings to the City of Surprise Development Services Department and copied some of you in attendance here today. To date, I have received no response from the City of Surprise. If the City of Surprise building inspector had inspected and identified the 22 distinct, unapproved, yet installed changes to the HVAC system in comparison to how the system was designed and documented, excuse me, in the sealed, approved, permitted plans, and then questioned the general contractor as to why they did not follow the sealed, approved, permitted plans, the HVAC system in question would have been installed per plans and would function as designed, and the issue in question would not exist. City of Surprise is responsible for the cause of this issue due either to negligence or poor oversight in plan review, where some errors in construction document preparation were clearly evident but not identified for revision, but most importantly, in building inspection. If the City of Surprise had identified these 22 unapproved field installation changes to the sealed, approved, permitted contract documents that categorically downsize the HVAC system in question and then questioned the general contractor prior to giving final inspection approval, the system would function as designed and this issue would not exist. To suggest otherwise is the City of Surprise has, and to shirk the basic responsibilities of an approving development services entity brings into question many more important issues regarding ARS, city ordinance.
Mr. Dobler, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
15 seconds.
All right. Thank you.
Professional and industry standards and the mandated responsibilities of the City of Surprise to ensure compliance and to provide the checks and balances required in the building industry to ensure basic life safety and construction. When can I expect a response from my email? And I hereby formally request from the City of Surprise the final approval checklist, the final approval documentation from the Development Services Department, and a meeting with the City Manager and Director of Development Services to discuss and resolve this.
Thank you, Mr. Dobler. And I don't recall having seen your letter, but you're going to get a response. Right now, I think if you'll meet the staff in the back of the room, you'll
Okay.
have answers to your questions. Thank you so
very
much.
much. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else?
That is all, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Next on our agenda is a work session on item number 1, if you would like to read the item.
Yes, that is a presentation and discussion pertaining to the library feasibility study.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. As you know, earlier this year, we hired Orcutt Winslow to complete a library feasibility study. The purpose of that study is to guide future library operations, library renovation projects, and new library construction. Here to present the completed study is Tom O'Neill with Orcutt Winslow, who partnered with LSI, Dig Studios, and Works Bureau to complete the study. Tom will briefly discuss the process, content of the studies, and study recommendations. Later, I'll further go into just some of the details regarding continuing operations as part of the county or going independent, and a cost associated with that. And then just so you know, we do have the director of Maricopa County Library District here, Cindy Kolozinski. So if a question comes up, she's more than happy to answer those. So turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Donna. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, I'm pleased to be here tonight to once again talk about the study we conducted for the library system. How appropriate is it to put the study in a book? Because it's a library book. Okay, first off, we kicked it off by interviewing both staff of the city and staff of the county. We benchmarked libraries that were similar in size and similar in serving their community. We did design comparisons to some forward thinking and futuristic libraries that have just been constructed. Desert Broom, Agave, and White Tanks Library that's pretty close to your neighborhood here. We did a lot of community engagement. District 4, we had a very robust communication there. We had communication at the library itself. We reached out through online survey, and we got a lot of great feedback from that. So the content of the study, we have an executive summary at the beginning. We talk about the process. We do benchmarking. There's some extensive benchmarking done in the book. We talk about community engagement. We looked at libraries of surprise for the future. We looked at the intergovernmental agreement, and that was a key piece to this in terms of the value. We found that it was good value. Facility options. We developed, kind of went beyond what the study was asking for and developed future options. We brought in Dig Studio as a partner. We had completed your park study, your 2015 master plan. And we looked at where would it logically be placed, both a 30,000 and a 10,000 square foot library. And then we put a cost model to that. In the event you want to proceed further with this, we analyzed the cost and we put a cost model. Now the cost model, some comparisons, and the survey are appendixes to the study in the back. So you have more detail there. So our recommendations. Number one, we do recommend continuing with the Maricopa Library District as a partner. We suggest a 2-year relationship. And the reason for that is the possibility of constructing a new library in 2 years or so. You may want to go back and revisit that agreement at that point to see if you want to expand it or bring it back in. Elicit community input. We feel that's very important. The library is a lively place. If you go there, you see it's used quite a bit. It's changing in its function. It needs to be updated to current needs of the community. But we suggest reaching out to the community. We had some really good feedback in the future. We also suggest your library be remodeled. There's some obvious things when you go into it. The charge desk is a different function today than it was originally. We would like to embrace natural light and LED lighting. The light levels in there in the library are somewhat low. And there's a number of other items that we found both touring, comparing, and getting feedback through the survey. We did put in the study 2 options to that remodel. Now these are only options. That's not the final solution. We'd go through, or the firm that's selected will go through a very methodical process in developing a design. And we also found value in Hollyhock Library. We suggested that could use an investment to freshen it up as well. We suggest utilizing the impact fees for the branch library. It aligns itself for serving more of the community. It's appropriate in terms of scale, a 10,000 square foot library. We suggest constructing new regional library when funds are available. Your community expressed the need and desire to have a library in close proximity, and so we suggest keeping pace with that and providing those services to your community. And exploring collection of new fees. The laws have changed. I think that's worthy of looking to the developers that are impacting your community to continue to contribute to fire, life safety, and libraries and such, to let that infrastructure grow with the community. And then last but not least, adopting a memorandum of understanding with the Friends of the Library. It's undefined right now. They're a valuable asset to the library. And so I think defining that relationship would be really valuable to both entities. So $4.5 million of impact fee could be attributed to this new library, this 10,000 square foot library, but we do suggest that you act on it fairly quickly. That is going to sunset. It takes about 9 months to develop a design for a library, and another year to a year plus to build a library. So you'll want to look at that in earnest. The 10,000 square foot library we suggest in working with Dig Studio Asante Park. It seems to be a good location to support the community and its growth. We also identified in the study locations for 2 30,000 square foot libraries in your regional parks as your city grows. At the end of the book, in the appendix, we do summarize in detail cost models to aid you in the pursuit of monies if you pursue a bond issue to support the growth of the library system. So those are summarized in a spreadsheet in the back.
So just to go into some of those options as far as remaining with the county or going independent. They did provide, we did have a meeting with the consultants and the county to kind of go through a comparison and what that would mean. As far as remaining, it would allow for continuity of services and ensure resident access to the county's inventory of materials and programs. Under the IGA, the county would continue to operate the library, maintaining existing service levels. Surprise will be responsible for reimbursing for the actual cost of operations plus 10% overhead. The city will also continue to be responsible for annual utility costs and building maintenance costs, which we're currently doing that right now. If the city remains with the county, one of the things we looked at is there's probably ways that we could work together and collaborate more on programming and really have a better understanding of our library and its services that are going on there. In the meantime, we stay with the county. We can work on designing and building another library in our city. If we want to decide we want to operate our own library, basically, we would recommend a 2-phased approach. To start this in July probably would not be feasible. We would want to contract at least for another year. We'd have to look at, there is one-time cost associated with facilitating this transition, migrating the Polaris system into our own system. IT will have to take that over, and we'll need to hire staff to be able to handle that. There will be some printing of new cards, so there will be costs associated with that, and then some IT infrastructure that would be expected. We would want to hire a library manager. There, we would need somebody to help operate, develop an operating plan, work with HR and job descriptions and getting all those folks hired, establishing procedures, contracts for interlibrary loans, that sort of thing, and purchasing, transitioning and securing those library materials, and then working with communications on website design. As far as asset replacement, we would have to develop an asset replacement list. Currently, when the computers and those type of things are replaced, that's something that's done when we're reimbursing the county. So they're actually in the process of replacing the computers over there. And so we're reimbursing that through the annual amount. So in FY20, we would assume operations. Under that option, this is probably the key point here. Residents will lose convenient access to 650,000 items that the county currently has. So we have 90,000 items currently in our library. That's what our residents would have access to. We can develop interlibrary loans, but those will take 2 to 3 weeks to get a book. So if a staff person or if a customer comes in and they want a certain book and we don't have it, they can either go to the White Tanks or Sun City, which would be the closest libraries, El Mirage, get a county card, and then get the book shipped there. So there would be a loss of those having that convenient access to items. The city would also need to purchase electronic databases so residents can have access to e-resources. Currently, we don't pay for that consortium that we get through the county. And then just so you're aware, we do receive funds currently for library assistance program. We would continue with that. And then the county would pay for the maintenance of our software if we were independent. We would just have to have IT staff to support that, that sort of thing. And also just to mention too, we would continue to receive those library assistance funds as long as we don't charge a non-resident fee. If we choose to charge a non-resident fee, then we would lose that as well. So as far as cost, we went out and met with Peoria, they are operating independently, and they have a library that's very similar in size, almost open the exact same hours that we are. So we looked at their budget, looked at they provided us with their org chart, their job descriptions, very, very helpful. So bottom line, it would cost more for us to operate on our own. And that's a lot. The most reason is because we have to pay for that consortium and also hiring staff to be able to take care of that library. We would estimated annual revenue based on that library would be about $50,000 a year, just for fine and copy print fees. We did speak to Goodyear as well because they have a 10,000 square foot library, and we thought that would be helpful in planning this next library and kind of getting an idea what that cost. They went through a similar study. They decided to stay with the county as well because of that loss of access to items. And their budget is about $800,000. So it kind of, just looking at some budgets over time, it's about close to $1 million per 10,000 square feet is about what it's costing. And I think with that, we'll open up for questions.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Overall, I thought the study was very well done, and it was good thought starters for all of us. But my question is, Donna, have you looked at the study and thought about it from a low cost, high impact, where we could start making improvements that wouldn't cost a lot of money, but would have a high impact on the experience that our residents has in the library?
You're speaking to making small improvements just within the library itself, not
Right.
really staff wise you're talking.
No, I'm talking about lighting,
Yeah.
organization, whether or not we need security,
Right.
those kind of issues.
Right. And we do not have to have the security guard as part of that. That was something that we clarified with them. But yeah, there's definitely, having a designated friends area. And I think the front desk, there's probably some things we can look at. They will have costs associated with that, but we would put that together.
Okay. And if we add to the footprint of the library
Mhm.
in the remodel, like you suggested, right? We cannot use impact fees for adding footprint to the library, huh?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall, we would really have to look at it based on the scope of those expansions. If it is adding services that we don't currently have, those wouldn't be eligible for impact fees. But if it is adding to the capacity to serve new residents, that may be eligible for impact fees. But it's a little bit tricky of a study, and it's a little bit difficult to justify. And we're fairly risk adverse where impact fees are concerned, given some of the outstanding issues we have.
I understand. It's just that, with limited resources, sometimes you have to, you do what you can to maximize what you have, And by the way, here's another question. This is a detail. What the heck do you mean by scrim? Using scrim?
Scrim?
Yes.
It's an architectural term. It's a.
No, but what is it?
It's a screen. It's a screening.
Okay, but are you talking about hanging it off the ceiling or the outside roof line?
And again, this is conceptual to kind of give some privacy, some separation, but we haven't fully defined it and designed it. But back to your original question, Council.
Yes.
Page 50,
Okay.
we go through on your current library, we're starting there, and we analyzed where the biggest shortcomings are and where the successes are with your current library.
I saw that.
And so that could be a good tickler in terms of where you put your focus.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking, taking those significant deficiencies and prioritizing,
Right.
with costs associated, trying to have a high impact, but the lowest cost, So that's what I'd recommend. My feedback is you go through that exercise and bring it back to us later. Maybe put it in the FY19 budget, Donna, because I like a lot of for instance, the signage on the library. I mean, it is kind of a nondescript building from some points of view.
Right.
We need help there, and what does that do for us? How much does that cost? Those kind of things, Donna. And then you already answered the security question. So yeah, the big thing for me is what does remodel mean, and what's our next steps? What do they cost? And what's the payback? What's the value, so to speak? So
We can definitely bring that back.
but I think this is a great roadmap.
Thank you.
I really do. I think you guys did a great job.
Thank you.
And so thank you.
Councilmember Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple questions. Number one, fiscal year 2020, we have to have already spent the impact fees of 4.5 million. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Remley, the cash that we have on hand in the Library Impact Fee Fund is just shy of $4.7 million. If not spent by January 1st of 2020, those funds must be refunded to the current owner, not the original payer, the current owner. So by January 1st, 2020, $4.7 million.
So we need to have expended it. In other words, written a check and paid that money. Not
Obligated.
not obligated it, not appropriated it, anything else. We need to have spent it.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Remley, the intention is to spend those monies by that date. And if we were to do so, it would support about a 10,000 square foot library at an operating cost of approximately $1 million.
2 years and 54 days.
I got it. Not very long. So we need a decision pretty soon about where we're going to spend that money, right?
Yes.
My next question, I noticed that the superintendent of Maricopa County Library District makes very little more than the 125,000 that you said it will take for a library manager. 100 and, let's see, let me look here, how much the current manager of the entire system makes. Sorry, I had it here. Anyway, it was very little more than what, yeah, one more page. Sorry, we've been flipping back and forth some pages. The library manager for the entire Maricopa County Library Districts makes 144,000. So the library manager, and for other Peoria Public Library System makes 81,000. For Avondale Public Library System makes 71,000. Okay, but ours would make 125,000.
When we met with Peoria, we went off of their organizational chart and looked at their job titles. So when you're kind of, the job titles are a little bit different, and we found that they're basically, he's almost like one of our division managers. So we looked at that salary and the information that we obtained from Peoria. So that in that list, that could be one of the managers directly for that branch. The gentleman we were speaking to, he oversees both of those libraries. So he probably makes a little bit more.
Okay. Now, my third question is, in the significant deficiencies in exterior appearance and entry experience, first impressions, and in other areas where we're talking about significant deficiencies in the Northwest Regional Library, in book drops, service points. We note all these significant deficiencies. I don't see a single significant deficiency in the branch library. Is that correct? We don't have any significant deficiencies?
You're talking the Hollyhock Library?
That's correct,
Yeah.
because we have two, you know.
Yes.
So we're referring to the Northwest, but on Hollyhock, we don't have any significant deficiencies?
The Hollyhock Library is about 1,000 square feet. It kind of falls out of the norm of our comparison of the other three. And so what we're
So
doing
would you say that's significantly deficient in size?
I think it serves a unique population, has a special need, has a special service to it. So it's hard to rank it amongst the agaves and the white tanks and those kind of libraries.
Right.
It's tough. And that we did allocate some monies towards it. We didn't define exactly what deficiencies we'd attribute it to, though.
Okay. Because to me, the appearance on the outside doesn't exactly tip the scales for me. When I go inside, the appearance is shabby. It isn't a place I'd want to study my homework. The service level is totally deficient, but it isn't mentioned in your study. That maybe it ought to be replaced. The library itself, that it is not adequate to service the needs of the people. If Northwest Regional is not adequate to service the needs of the people, that one certainly isn't. No?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And if you look at our cost model in the appendix, we did break $75,000 down to essentially finishes, exterior and interior finishes, to give it a refresh.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that, refresh the allocation. I looked at that, and I looked at the cost to build it new at $250,000, a little over $250,000. But I'm not even sure if we did that, we'd be there, frankly. But all I was saying is, in the deficiencies we noted in the system, we might as well have just ignored the fact that we have a branch library because it's not getting the job done over there at 12 hours a week, you know. So
And now 18. We
now
it
it's 18
Yeah.
due to a contribution
Mhm.
from Friends of the Library. Yeah. But also in this study, it does not refer to any contributions from Friends of the Library because, as I understand it, under the county system, they are refusing contributions to the library. And that's something that would have to be changed in our contract language, I guess, in order for them to even accept contributions. That really bothers me that we can't enhance our own libraries with our own money.
Friends of the Library are essential and a great partner in every library we look at. And we think that through a memorandum of understanding, that could really be defined and enhanced. We agree.
I think that should be changed in the contract language in the future, that when we wish to contribute to our library, we should be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Mayor Tandy.
Thanks. I've got some clarification questions. You mentioned that we pay 10% overhead, and I don't know if this is something that maybe our finance director can help out with, but is that fully burdened, or is that with their in place of their indirect cost, or I'm just trying to understand.
It would be indirect cost. That's basically just a percentage that was set up years ago, but that covers, they do all of their ordering downtown. So it's all their HR, their payroll, everything that entails those indirect costs.
Okay.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, I'm Cindy Kolozinski. I'm the director of the Maricopa County Library District. And if I could further clarify for you, so the centralized services that we provide to all the libraries that we operate are exactly what Donna outlined: the HR, the technology, all the tech services, our finance, our collection. So all the books that are ordered that are put in 17 branches are done centralized. And all of that is overhead that, is in the 10%.
Okay. So that kind of leads into, maybe you can help me with this other question, the interlibrary loans. My familiarity goes way back 25 years, more than 25 years. I worked with the Orange County Public Library System, and we also had a San Diego Library System, which helped with the interlibrary loans.
Right.
And I think, my memory may be fading, but I think we accommodated contractually with some people where we would give same speed of service. What would cause, could we contract with the Maricopa County Library System to get the same level of service that we get right now?
So what happens now with interlibrary loan is the county system charges $6 for every interlibrary loan request. It costs us about $25 each request. So every time we're lending an item out, shipping it out, wear and tear on the item, it comes back to us again in shipping. It's just not cost effective to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are some systems in Maricopa County, other independent library systems that do offer interlibrary loan at no cost, but there are really a lot of parameters and restrictions on interlibrary loan. So there is not an option to interlibrary loan media, meaning DVDs, audiobooks, new releases. So what you're doing is, again, it's those researchers and whatnot that want specific types of materials that are typically asking for interlibrary loans. It's not a typical borrowing system.
So that kind of reminds me, going way back, staff is probably a high portion of the cost, and facilities. Collection, what is a typical collection percentage of the overall library budget run right now? What's the best practice?
So what we did we provided for the materials. What did we do here? Let me see. For the annual collection, for books and other materials, for Hollyhock, it's about $12,000. And for Northwest, it is about $325,000.
That's a new acquisition for collections per year?
Correct.
Okay.
Per year.
Okay.
So the difference too in that doing centralized collection, we have a team that selects the items.
Mhm.
They arrive at your branch shelf ready. So all the staff have to do is check them in and shelf them. So there's no cataloging. There's none of that used to happen years ago.
Mhm.
So it's not only helps the workflow, but it's just time sensitive. So you're getting bestsellers on the shelf the same time you've got bookstores doing it.
Okay. And a lot of the other members spoke about the improvements we can do to our existing library, and I'm interested in hearing about that our next budget year. The last thing, I'm just been kind of curious. I'm thinking, futuristic. Libraries are changing with technology and everything. Is there the opportunity or the need for different types of special service areas or special types of maybe just a place where we have people that need access to technology or
Sure.
I'm just, what kind of other footprints and creativity can we have and maybe stretch our impact fees?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and it's something to analyze as we create new libraries. But that's what maybe what is being identified as what's lacking in the current library, because it is a community hub. It is the community front porch. So much is happening there besides just borrowing and lending. You want to have people communicating. You want to have entrepreneurs in there talking about what the next best idea is. You want teens in there so that they're lifelong learners. So I think a good example was that when Don identified the Goodyear branch, which is a 10,000 square foot facility that has some of the amenities that your large branch doesn't have. It has a place for entrepreneurs. It has a programming room. It has a lot of those things that is a typical everyday community hub. And so, yeah, the footprint is definitely shrinking, in my opinion. But it depends on what your needs are. Exactly. So you want to answer the community needs. And that's why the focus groups are so important, so that we can listen to what it is. With your customer satisfaction survey, the same thing. People want study rooms at the Northwest Regional Library, and we'd love to provide those.
Yeah, my guess is even if the footprint is shrinking, probably the utilization is getting more intense and a lot more creativity from the architects to make it all work, I'm guessing.
Right. Makerspace is
That's right.
hugely, popular. And this is something that would come out when we do a design process. We would meet with, the public and various individuals and of course, library staff so we can develop the best library possible.
It's a mobile society, so people are bringing their devices to the library with them now, which is different than having a desktop computer for every single person that walks through the door. It's not necessary. So if you create a space where they're able to be comfortable and communicate with each other in Wi-Fi, you're set.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Councilmember Duffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick. On number 3, when you said that the remodel, I understand, I get that, and to maybe possibly expand the regional library. So then in 5, when you said you want to construct another 10,000 square foot and then 8, 25 to 30, were those two numbers figured if that was the first one was expanded or if it wasn't?
We looked at it in totality, and we wouldn't suggest that it all happen at once, but total build out, where would you logically place a larger 30,000 square foot library, expanding your existing library closer to 30,000 square feet with some of the amenities we just talked about, a teen center, a more defined teen center, early childhood reading space that could be separate and very creative. Looking at reducing the charge desk. The charge desk is a lot of self-charging now or self-checkout, and so that can be reduced quite a bit. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Plus, it's a 2002 building where a lot of the systems are becoming beyond their useful life, and so we want to start looking at some of those things too and keep it contemporary from a standpoint of building systems.
I guess my big question is, if you expanded the existing regional library, would you necessarily need 10,000 and
Good
another
question.
30,000
Through our community meetings at the library, there was several folks in the audience that said they have to travel very far to get to the Northwest Library. that if another branch was built, it would be much more convenient to them. And so they're looking at other options instead of coming to Northwest. And so what we're trying to do there was serve the community as the community grew. I believe originally the Northwest, your population was around 37,000, and you're well over 100,000 today. And so that population spread out. We're trying to reach and get that convenience factor back in.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, folks. I want to follow up on something that Councilman Remley said, that we cannot use the donated money from the Friends of the Libraries to enhance our own library. Where's that coming from?
So right now we are reimbursing 100% to the county. So for them to take money, really it's the city that would accept the money. And that way we would, whether they're purchasing something, just as we're doing at Hollyhock, we accepted $15,000 and we're able to increase those hours. So we were able to increase our contract with the county. They're staffing it, they're programming it on Saturdays now, and we're paying for that. So it wouldn't make sense for the county to accept the money because we're paying the county to operate it. So it would be the city accepting those funds.
But the library, in particular Hollyhock, is getting the donation.
Correct.
To make the library better over there. Because they are lacking, and Councilman Remley's right in this, in that they are really lacking in services over there, and the building itself is pretty shabby. Thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No? Councilmember Remley?
Yes. As a follow-up, I wanted to ask a question. Lindsay, you indicated that the 4.5 million would build about a 10,000 square foot facility, which is probably about the size we would use for any branch library that we would build in another location within the city. Earlier, it was said how much money the operating costs would be for such a facility. Is that about $1 million a year, you said?
That's correct. And based on research with other cities and looking at their budgets, that's about the average for a 10,000 square foot library that's open,
Okay.
you know, a good number of hours a week. It would cost about that much.
So would it be fair to say that if we spend the money that we already have, the 4.5 million, to build an additional 10,000 square foot facility, that we're going to need to increase our budgets by about another $1 million for the IGA?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember. I believe we have one person from the general public that wishes to speak on this
we
item.
sure do. It's Allie Klein.
Ms. Klein, if you would come forward and address us and identify yourself for the record.
Hi, I'm Allie Klein, and I've been in Surprise for 16 years now. 18598 North Red Mountain Way, Surprise, 85374. I'm also president of the Friends of the Surprise Libraries and the chair for Read on Greater Surprise. So I'm very focused on literacy and things like that that happen in our community. First of all, I want to thank you, Mayor and Council, for letting me speak. Friends of the Library, since 2006, has donated $205,993.17, which comes out to about $22,800 a year if we were to average it. Until this year, we did pay all of that money into Maricopa County, just to let you know. And the reason we did not pay in the 1 year that shows in the study was because we were going through the transition between paying the county and paying the city. So there was a 1 year time frame when we weren't able to do that. But we're more than happy to spend the money going forward. One of the things that came up as a topic for our group and your group was better use of the large surprise room. We were talking about something that was a small item that could possibly be done for less money. A few years ago, there was a study done by the city Public Works Department, and for approximately $50,000, the large surprise room could be divided up into 3 sections. Since the flooring and the ceiling has the track area available, it would have to be done, and I have no idea how much it would cost now, but that might be something that would be a possibility of a small thing that would allow more usage, study groups. They'd be, depending on who's organizing it and tracking it and keeping track of who's going in there. And the other thing that I have worked with the Natterburg school system and the county is a shared use grant opportunity. And this is something like what the city already does with the baseball fields and things like that, where the school has facilities where they can then go and the city can use them and they can use them. And we were a participant in the shared use grant that was awarded to the Natterburg schools so that their library up in the Whitman area could be used and open to the public for them to use. Not that that's the ultimate answer, but when you're talking about ways to mitigate people getting to libraries in District 4 where maybe there's a distance, perhaps that's an opportunity that could be looked at for the people in District 4 to use some of the school libraries that are already there in order to have access to their Wi-Fi. And that might be an interim kind of idea until you decide where you're going to put the next library. I just want to say that Friends is dedicated to supporting whatever the City Council decides. We'd like to be included in your plans. We'd like to get some more money in so we could spend more money in the community. We have spent over $500,000 on the Surprise Community from the bookstore that we have in your library, and we do appreciate that space very much. And so anything that we can do to be supportive of your help, your decisions, help the community, work on their early literacy, those are the areas that we'd like to be supportive of. So that's all I have to say. Any questions? Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
All righty.
First of all, that was a public comment, and so I appreciate that. But I am going to tell you thank you for all the years of service and all the years of donating money to our local library services. That's just tremendous. It's tremendous local participation. And so if I'm to understand it, the issue of the money being collected and donated, is basically a bookkeeping thing that we're just to make sure that the money was staying local instead of going into the county pot and maybe coming back, maybe not coming back. This actually is some accountability to make sure that it does truly come back. And there's nothing on the county for this. This is just making sure that it's spent where it needs to be spent. So I just want to make that clear because that's what I got from it. So
That's what I got too.
So again, thank you for that. That's really important.
One more
So-
speaker, Mayor, I'm sorry.
There's another speaker,
Ed Hansel.
Mr. Hansel. I just saw him. Oh, there he is. He came down to offer his request. If you would, Ed, just identify yourself for the record.
My name is Ed Hansel. I live at 13570 West Caribbean Lane in Surprise. I am a former network engineer. I retired from that. And during the 12 years that I was doing that, I amassed a extensive library of technical books on computer networking. Some of these books were very expensive, over $125 a piece. My wife got tired of looking at these a couple of years ago and decided that I needed to get rid of them as I'm no longer working in that field. And so I gathered up 6 or 7 of them, and I brought them to our library and to donate. And I was told, take them home. We don't want your donations. I thought that was rude, and it deprived a lot of people of some information that could have been helpful in their careers or deciding on what career they wanted to take. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Hansel. Anyone else?
That is all, Mayor.
All right. Thank you very much. So I don't see any further questions on this. I want to thank you for all the work you've put into this. This is really great. We obviously have some work to do, and we want to make certain that we expend that money in the right place. And so I'm sure the council is going to be speaking a lot about this, working amongst ourselves to try to figure out how to do this right. So I thank you for helping us draw the map and guide us through this very important decision.
On the behalf of our team, I'd like to thank the city for allowing us to do this. It's a great adventure and a lot was learned. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. All right. Next item.
Presentation and discussion by City Gate Associates on the draft report for the City of Surprise Public Safety Master Plan, which was conducted in fiscal year 2017.
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We have a very important report for you to hear tonight from our consultant, and I want to make just a few comments leading into that. They were retained after a competitive bid process to develop a public safety plan for the city of Surprise involving police, fire, medical, and even our emergency management function. And the funds of this came, as Sherry just mentioned, it was approved in last year's budget. This master plan is designed to be a roadmap for the future here in Surprise for public safety and also facilitate organizational planning as we design a plan for the next 15 years to accommodate growth in our city. It's taken over 10 months to complete this plan, and which if you've had an opportunity to review any of the documents, I know that they were very lengthy, but you will be able to tell that they were very exhaustive and looked at many different factors in providing public safety to our city. As will be pointed out during the presentation tonight, the recommendations you'll see are advisory. But that said, I would have to tell you that over 15 years, more than likely, most, if not all of those recommendations will probably come to fruition in one form or another, particularly as our city grows and as we strive to continue to provide the quality service that we provided to our citizens for all these years. You'll also notice that in the future, planning by police, fire, and emergency management, any goals they achieve, any budget requests they make will be closely aligned with the recommendations in this report. Also should mention that should we be fortunate enough for particularly question 1 and the bond should pass today, it would certainly give us a leg up on some of the recommendations in the report. I also wanted to mention that all the recommendations here you'll see tonight are compliant with our 2030 general plan and also the City Council strategic goals. And lastly, I just want to say a big thanks to the City Gate team. They have been extraordinary to work with, but also our fire and police chiefs, Chief Abbott, Chief Young, and their staffs. Lindsay Duncan and her team have been phenomenal as well, and also members of the city management team. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Stuart Gary, who is the team lead for City Gate, and he will introduce his team and how we're going to proceed going forward. But I think before that, Madam Chair, I have a question from Councilman Hall.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Mike, when was the last time that the police did a master plan?
There has not been a previous police master plan. Fire had one and done in 2007.
So it's been 10 years since we did a fire, and you don't remember?
There was never one done here in this city, no.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And with that, Mr. Stuart Gary. Stuart?
Good evening.
Good
or
evening.
Afternoon.
I'm time zone conflicted anyways today, so good day, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Stuart Gary, the public safety principal, and also the retired fire chief / consultant on the team. With me, I have Chief Sam Spiegel, our police chief on the team. He'll be following me with the police presentation. And I also have retired in the back Fire Chief Bob Myers, who's a resident of the Valley and one of my local Arizona team members. With that, I'd like to go through briefly the high notes of the fire department master plan. And by the way, I am the consultant who did the last fire master plan a decade ago. So I have continuity of experience with both pre and post recession surprise and the issues you all face. I'd like to start for the council members, and this applies the first statement to both plans to a lesser degree. There are no mandatory federal or state minimum requirements for fire and EMS response times in America. This is a local choice issue, and therefore you have the level of service you can afford, which is not always what you might desire in any one given year. And there is this constructive tension between setting customer service goals and the ability to fund those goals, especially as communities evolve. You are not by any means my only client post-recession that has not fully recovered, that still faces severe economic challenges to provide staffing and services. However, in fire and police services, the body of federal and state regulations do apply for safety. You can't run a broken, under-equipped, under-led fire department that puts firefighters, paramedics in harm's way or endangers the citizens, residents with unsafe services. So there's this next constructive tension of, well, if I do it at all, it comes at a pretty serious expense to be safety compliant. What I want you to take away tonight about fire station and equipment spacing, two simple things. Fire deployment is about the speed and the weight of the attack. Speed is a single neighborhood-based unit, gets there fairly quickly, staffed and equipped to deal with small, everyday emergencies. Single patient EMS, unattended cooking fire on the stove, dumpster fire, auto fire, those kinds of single responder. If you don't get there too quickly, then the entire force is going to have to come, and that's what we all call the first alarm, and you read about it in the newspaper. The weight of the attack is the massing of multiple units to serious emergencies to keep them from becoming greater than that first alarm. And the first alarm staffing and equipment is spaced and designed to keep a serious emerging fire from becoming catastrophic and leaving the building or the parcel of origin, endangering other aspects of the community. So speed and weight of the attack. In overview, your incident trends and analysis, you're a typical Western United States suburban community. You have requests for calls for service every hour of every day of the week. The volume is higher during daylight hours than middle of the night hours. Those volumes are typical, reflecting your demography and socioeconomics. Yes, you're a little older in some respects in terms of age cohorts, a little bit more EMS than in other clients I have, but by no means you're doing only EMS. And I want the council to also please remember that even if the fire truck only goes to a fire once a quarter, you're not buying fire services for volume of consumption, because let's face it, that would be a bad thing. You're buying like life and homeowners insurance. You're buying fire insurance for the community. And whether you use the insurance once or daily, you're trying to spread that safety blanket across the landscape. Surprise is now running about 46 incident responses a day. 75% are medical related. The EMS volume is increasing modestly each year, and some of that's due to national healthcare economics, the availability of primary healthcare. 90% of your dispatch times through the regional Phoenix Center are a little too long, and we find that across our clients in the Valley. Phoenix Regional Communications asks a lot of questions on behalf of some of the clients at the front end to try to send the right resource in very busy areas. Asking more than what is your problem and address just adds times to dispatch. The chief is well aware of that, and the regional consortium continues to work that number down. Your crew turnout times from hearing the alarm to wheels rolling are fantastic, some of the best I've had in my clients set in the last year or two. They're a minute 25. Your travel times, that's strictly driving time across the road network, are long at 7 minutes and 12 seconds. So when we get into complete customer service measures in a moment, a little long in the tooth on dispatch, fabulous crew response, turnout times. Driving times are reflective of not enough stations in all neighborhoods yet. This is back to your instant demand by hour of the day. The low tide curve on the left is between midnight and 6 a.m. It's interesting and surprise. You do rise with morning rush hour and get very busy from early morning, 8, 9, 10 a.m. through noontime. It then levels off and doesn't appreciably decrease until about 7 p.m. So that's your busiest times of the day. And our study technically went into what we call simultaneous events, and especially for paramedics and first responder paramedic engines? Do you have enough when you have 5 or 6 medical calls running at once? Remember what I said about 45, 47 incidents in a 24-hour period at high noon. Many of those companies are busy on open incidents at once. If you look at that demand as a heat map table, Monday through Sunday, the redder cells are midday. That's when the department can expect the most demand for service. That's also when the department is trying to maintain its people and equipment. It's trying to do public education activities. There's a lot going on daytime. And increasingly, when we recommend in the future to add companies for simultaneous workload, it's this kind of tool that will help the chief plan to say, you know, I might need another ambulance, but only part of the day. Or I need a whole nother fire truck because a whole new subdivision has opened. Your call to arrival times in 2016 from hello to what's the problem at Phoenix Regional Dispatch to the first unit arrival is 8 minutes and 15 seconds. To put that in perspective, national best practices and our recommendation would be 7 minutes and 30 seconds. So you can see if you took a nip and a tuck out of dispatch time and eventually travel with more stations, you could easily be compliant with best outcomes. I don't want to say compliant with national recommendations. We talk in the report about risks. And what you're trying to deliver is a customer service level that in very serious medical emergencies, the first paramedic gets there in time to begin stabilization. In a small fire, you're getting there in time to keep a small fire small. And if you don't get there in time, then certainly the situation can decay. If we look at the map of current fire stations, 4-minute travel is desirable in an urbanized area. Remember, you're doing a little over 7 minutes. Green is where the current stations cover in 7 minutes. In terms of spacing, do you have some infill areas to work on? Yes, you do. Station 305 currently only has a ladder truck. As the grant and funds progress, if you can staff that, our number one recommendation was to put the center of the donut hole with a firefighting engine also. If we then look today at that first alarm, that effective response force of a chief officer team, 3 engines, a ladder truck, and a paramedic unit, you do cover the core of the city. So while you may have some first due single station gaps, if I have to get the entire force together to something serious, the core of the city, but obviously not the edges. And if you go deeper into the study, we also turned on the automatic aid partner stations. They really don't relieve you of any coverage needs or responsibilities in the core. No growing community can cover out to the edges. You just can't cover 90 to 100% of the road network as you grow out from the center. And certainly, as you know, up past Station 304, and we said this 10 years ago, ideally, not telling you your business, just as a deployment analyst, ideally, if you keep growing like concentric tree rings out, you'll maximize the cost effectiveness of station location. If you leapfrog develop out either one of those fingers of possible city growth, you're going to have to build more fire stations and more ambulance crews sooner because they'll be disconnected from, in effect, I call it the palm of the hand and surprise. So keep that in mind as you think about development patterns. This is the pattern of current density of EMS and rescue activity right around Station 302. And you can see southeast of 302 why we recommended 305 have another first responder, have that engine. That's some of your highest call volume activity there in the eastern center to southeast area of the city at present. Again, our key deployment findings I've already stated. Turnout is excellent. Travel time is 3 minutes longer than desirable, and you just can't hit every call in some of those neighborhoods within 4 to 5 driving minutes. Due to station location, traffic, and simultaneous incidents, the bottom line is travel time cannot be lowered without additional resources. There's just no magic thing, can't drive faster. You may ask me, but what about traffic signal preemption and turning the light green? And what about not allowing so many gated communities and gates that have to be electronically open? Those will save a few seconds, but when your gap is 2 to 3 minutes and you have that many whole neighborhood stations not yet activated, you really can't appreciably buy 7 minutes to 4 minutes by just doing something more quickly. Our deployment additions would be to continue to grow the ambulance program as economics and volumes permit. I've mentioned staffing the engine at 305. Over time, as growth patterns occur, adding stations 08, 09, and 310 in the urbanized area, looking at your general plan and growth projections with community development and the manager's staff, it would appear to us at this time it's more likely than not that those areas will infill before you start to sprawl outside of the core of Surprise. Eventually, with 10 stations open, you would move the ladder at 305 to 303, and you'd add a second ladder company at 310. So said this way, if you finished infilling what is the core of Surprise today and got to 10 stations, 2 ladder companies, and the headquarters positions, you would really adequately be covering what is Surprise today with the remaining infill development. None of these projections now are projecting out the westerly or the northwesterly growth fingers until you really have concrete development plans and a road network that we can use computer models against. It's sheer speculation to say, what does Surprise Fire Department look like 20 or 30 years from now at build out? If in fact you urbanize clear to your city limits, you could easily be a 20, 30 station fire department someday, which is another reason in 5 and 10 year jumps to be thinking always, and the chief is very good at this, at your logistics, like the warehouse and supply in your headquarters team, because as you start to grow past 10 stations, you can't add people and fleet maintenance and warehouse capacity in a fortnight. You've got to see that coming and slowly ramp that capacity commensurate with civic growth. If we look at that build-out plan of adding those engines in blue on your screen, would be the added infill coverage. You can see a little bit of double dark blue there between 305 and 310. That would be the addition of overlapping coverage. Remember, I showed you the yellow-red heat map of call for service densities. Having simultaneous incidents means having 2 units that actually overlap each other is beneficial, and you'd want that overlap where the greatest demand for service is. If we then look at that first alarm, that effective response force, if you compare the 2 images, is wait a minute, Chief Gary, it almost looks like the last one. It does and it doesn't, because your core was covered, but now your southern boundary down towards 307 and 308 are better covered with multiple force. 309 doesn't show coverage, but that's because the road network doesn't exist yet. We can't model it until you approve final subdivision plans, but that area would fill in with multiple units substantially closer to the city limits. So our final deployment recommendations are: first, adopt updated outcome-driven response time goals. And a lot of my elected official clients at some point will say, well, why do I need a goal? I haven't had one yet, or I've had a fuzzy strategic plan goal about good customer service. You're a growing city. As you work with development applicants, how do you enact impact fees and other service standards without saying, here's our measurable, specific customer service goal? And when a new resident comes to town, let's say 2 years in, and thinks they have a problem with response time, or is in a new subdivision and comes here and says, where's my fire station? You can roll out your customer service objectives, your time over distance economic to service pro forma, and say, that's in the master plan. It'll happen about here. We're sorry we were a little too long today, but 2 units were already busy on calls, and you were in a neighborhood that doesn't yet have a full fire station. So yes, we're sorry, but we do have a goal, and we're working towards our goal. I think that's much more defensible than to say, we're really sorry we got there too slow for your particular view of that situation. Consider the equity of coverage to similar neighborhoods by adopting a trigger point to add a fire station. Don't just let development pressure, because Acme Corp says, you know, it'd be really good marketing for me to have the next new fire station. Well, look at the density of undercovered streets, the population, the location of incidents using the tools of the master plan, And as revenue rises and you can afford to add staff, focus that on where it's needed the most, not just where Acme Corp may desire it for marketing. And continue to expand the ambulance program per the certificate of necessity. Briefly going through fire administration overview, you're providing a really wide array of best practice fire and EMS, public education, fire prevention services to the community. The staff is following published best practices where feasible for your socioeconomic climate zone, not one tool fits all in diverse, wide America. You've changed ambulance billing company to improve the methodology and the cost effectiveness of that. However, as you grow the EMS ambulance transport program, your EMS division has undermet oversight and training needs. They're really strained to the max almost now. And we've recommended in the master plan when the next ambulance crew is added, you really need to remember, even more so than firefighting, as dangerous as firefighting is, EMS is one of those highly regulated state, county, federal standards things, and they're exercised under the same clinical oversight guidelines as hospital doctor's office staff are. And you need a headquarters team to supply, train, and give them quality control oversight. The administration division has significant logistics workload. You're just right now going through another batch of normal intake hiring for retirement and turnover. Every time you add people, you add facilities, you're challenging the logistics train. And you've all heard the term, an army marches on its stomach. Very true in the fire service. It takes that whole headquarters team to keep the men and women on the street deployed, equipped, adequately trained, in a safe manner. And I have told my clients in recession, if you hit the next downturn, and it's easy to say, well, we'll keep cuts away from customer service, let's just turn off headquarters positions. You can get to the point where that's the wrong move. I've literally advised clients, I'd rather you brown out a fire station than start to so cut training and quality assurance that you really don't know what's going on with the workforce. You can improve your health and safety program. The fire marshal position is very technical, and we would recommend converting that over timing and a retirement to a permanent non-sworn position. Get a full-time code professional. Doesn't have to be a PE, an engineer per se, but get somebody who is trained and certificated in building and fire codes and sees that as a profession over the long haul. And the last critical thing, and I wish I wasn't saying this on the heels of 2 hurricanes and mass casualty disasters in the United States, even though you to some degree have a halo over this valley, and maybe your biggest disaster risk is environmental due to flash flooding, you really need a full-time emergency management manager. You need more than a part-time battalion chief doing internal emergency operations center and hardwiring of staff, but that community outreach to the allied health groups. And I have to tell you, I planned for it for a decade as a chief of department. We worked with handicapped and needs populations to try to target them in a disaster. It's very sad to say, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, paid close attention to the press, and the disturbing news after Santa Rosa was the next day, as the 911 calls were being reported, the handicapped, the very elderly were left behind and perished. The safety network just wasn't robust enough to pre-plan, pre-target, and in my opinion, have a neighbor help neighbor program. Police and fire can't do it all. So citywide emergency preparedness manager would be great as you can afford it. Logistics is currently, as you know, only in 1,000 square foot climate controlled area. It's not enough. You've got critical fire and EMS supplies outdoors in metal containers. That needs to be fixed. Not centrally located for ease of access. You have a little bit of space now for maybe one more ambulance, and then you're out of space. I hope the public has heard this council's request for the bond, certainly today. So in the citywide program for emergency management, what do they do? Your disaster plan, the EOC training and coordination, employee training, mention the liaison, and have that both internal focus first, so you all are prepared when you need to activate the disaster plan, and then have the outward focus for the community partners. What will an emergency manager do? I've already mentioned most of these for training and compliance. but also the drills and the training. In the fire service and law enforcement, Sam and I will say, what does training do fundamentally? It builds muscle memory so that when you're in a highly stressful situation, your body's been pre-programmed on how to handle it. Your emergency management, public works, library director, finance team, city manager need EOC drills and trainings to be pre-programmed in stressful situations, that when they're faced with a community disaster and you activate the disaster plan, they've done some role playing and become comfortable. So our administrative staff recommendations are: establish the emergency manager position, secure the indoor logistics, climate controlled storage spaces, convert the fire marshal to a permanent technical position. And then over time, we charted out in the report adding office support professionals and logistics positions, and add medical oversight and training commensurate as you grow field staff as revenues increase. My last comment is, I won't go into the math now. We did do work with finance and city management over some revenue over time math, and have given you a trigger threshold concept to think about. You can certainly lower or raise the number of units, but I wanted to sensitize you to the fact we've calibrated that to the current taxation system and the number of units in the pipeline. And it may look a little high to say when 15,000 people are beyond the reach of a fire company, because in many parts of middle America, that's an entire small town. But you do have fire stations here. It's more a time over distance coverage thing, and you just can't write blank checks. So the phasing will take many years to accumulate. With that, the chief and I are here if you have any questions before police steps up. Thank you for your attention.
Questions, members? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, a nice job on this study.
Thank you.
It's a lot to absorb. And like anything else, we have to manage the resources we have to accomplish this, but it's over time period. I'm curious about a couple things. On the medical, are welfare checks included in the medical?
Madam Chair, Council Member Hall, are you referring to our total call volume?
Yes.
Yes.
When he says 75% of the calls are medical, are welfare checks in that 75%?
Yes, they are.
And what about falls?
Yes, they are.
They're in medical also.
Yes, they are.
Okay. All right. And then I was looking at page 33 and 34, which is the 90% performance of call to first unit arrival by station. So that's what we're accomplishing right now.
Correct.
Okay.
And remember, fractal measures at what minute have you accomplished 90% of the incidents.
Right.
So you'll have some incidents.
They're even higher than that. Yeah.
Well, only the 10%. So that's
Yeah.
the beauty of fractal math. But you could have incidents with a 2-minute time. You could have an incident with 0 time because they drove in blowing the horn on the fire station ramp and said, "Come help me."
Yeah.
So,
right.
But cumulatively, you've gotten a 90% of all requests by that clock minute.
Okay. And station 304 really stands out in the time. And I don't know, is it because they have to drive south for so many of their calls, Chief, coming down Grand to Sun City Grand or Sun Village or whatever from up north? Is that why it's taken so long?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall, it's both. They do travel north as well, and they also have a lot of calls down south of where they're at, down around 163rd Avenue and Grand, and then out west up Grand Avenue. So ultimately, the travel time there is lengthy.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess that's my obvious question is, what can we do about that? To lower that, because they're like 30% over the rest of the stations.
Part of your headache there is also simultaneous calls. So if 4, 5, 6 calls at once open in the core or the eastern side of the city, at some point the chief's got to bring resources down, which results in those longer times.
Yeah.
And he's also got to bring the regional dispatch system. The beauty of that is they'll bring automatic aid companies in from the west side. that's some pretty complicated moving parts there for that one company. That doesn't mean that their customer service is that weak in the assigned footprint, the station area, but it's just that they're in the core a lot also.
Okay. And I guess I was going to ask you, Chief, about ambulances. We want to add ambulances, right? We want to continue to add ambulances. Is the revenue stream catching up with the add-on of ambulances?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall, the answer to your question is yes. And I would also almost defer to the Finance Director, Lindsay Duncan. In fact, she's coming down right now.
Because I remember there was a lag in terms of billing when you got got paid, and I just want to make sure as we're moving along here that.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall, this is perfect timing for this discussion, as Chief and I actually met last week on this subject, and our ambulance fund is currently meeting expectations as we originally proposed them to council. And so we are seeing the lag, but we are also seeing about what we expected as far as returns. And so we're still looking at an interfund loan over the longer term, but it's definitely meeting our expectations.
Until things get caught up and.
Correct. But it is definitely meeting our expectations and performing as we had desired and as we had hoped.
Because we don't want to, I think we want the ambulances. I think that's a real asset to the city, but we don't want to get too far ahead.
Correct.
And where it's really a drag. But, okay. And then one of the things you brought up was EMS oversight and training. You're talking about who are you talking about specifically?
That's everybody, including members of the management team that hold either emergency medical technician or paramedic credentials, have mandatory continuing education hours mandated by state and county regulations. So the actual academic and hands-on hours have to be counted and tracked, and they have to pass recertification exams.
I see.
They're just like a healthcare worker in any other institutions. They are credentialed. They must do continuing education to maintain credentialing, and you must run a quality assurance program, which, for lack of a better term, is a chart review.
Okay.
So you have to have medically trained people on staff reviewing sections of charts, especially the more difficult ones, and both focusing training and perhaps one-on-one interactions with Joe or Jane to say, in this situation, it worked out okay, but it might not have had this occurred.
Okay.
And we want to refresh you on X, Y, or Z.
Gotcha. And this is not a defensive comment because I think, you're the expert or the consultant. But I cannot tell you how many compliments I get on our fire emergency medical staff. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, people love them. I think there's actually some women that actually call just so this guys can walk in the house. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, no, really, but they do a great job.
And that attitude, that customer service comes from the top down. It's always been in this agency, even 10 years ago as a younger growing agency. It's also enforced by quality assurance, chart review. Management can lead and coach the bedside manner, and then chart review and training ensures clinical safety and competency.
Right. And when you're talking about, my last question, when you're talking about Station 310, it looked like it was plotted around Litchfield and Bell. That would be actually on our city-owned land north of Bell, right, on Litchfield.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall, yes, that's where we could identify city-owned properties right there by the Sun Village hall or storage facility, and where we're storing trash cans at the point at this moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I ask any questions, just one comment. What a wonderful job.
Thank you.
You really did a nice job on this. I'm very impressed. Also, I'm very impressed at the emergency preparedness recommendation. And most of the recommendations you had just went right down the line from some things that I've seen myself. And specifically in the terms of logistics, in the event that we did have one of those disastrous emergencies and we really needed to get at our supplies, I could see us scrambling all over town right now trying to pick up the supplies we needed to get, whereas we don't have any centralized place, and hopefully the bond issue would take care of that. But that was, to me, a tremendous need. I had one other question, but I've forgotten it, so it must be a senior moment for me. So thank you, but thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Vice Mayor Tandy.
Thanks. I also want to say thank you for putting this together. It does reinforce a lot of things we've been talking with the chiefs about, and I think it's going to be a helpful tool in talking to the residents about why this stuff is really important, because they don't know. And we actually do have a lot of really engaged residents that want to say, hey, why do we have to do this? Well, there's a lot of good justification and reasons right here, and it applies directly to our specific issues and concerns. So I really appreciate being able to have this. And I'm going to be referring to it. Hopefully it'll be posted online besides just the agenda, and we can refer to it quite frequently, point the residents toward that direction.
Thank you. Councilmember Remley, I'm going to refer back to you because I think you remembered what the question you wanted to ask.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Senior moment it was. 10 years ago, you were here and did the only previous master plan and study. How do you compare the city of Surprise today in 2017 compared to how it was in 2007? And in terms of our fire department and its readiness and responses from what you saw then?
A healthy evolution of a healthy patient, a healthy organization. You had healthy, forward-leaning management then, you do today. You've recruited, hired, and trained quality officers, and some of the now chief officers were captains or committee members, a decade ago, being exposed to growth and growing a department. You've evolved as a city consistent with your general plan and your vision. No pun intended, when I started looking at your current planning documents, there's no surprise in surprise. Did the recession stall you and everybody else for a long period of time? Oh, absolutely. So some of the rampant growth that led to that first master plan, and you also did a big wastewater and freshwater study at that point. Mm-hmm. The growth graph line didn't examine or continue, but this is not anything more than just its surprise as I saw it 10 years ago, just bigger, but still very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Duffy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, is there a time frame for Station 309? I know that the bond just maybe to get the land, and the reason I ask is kind of just like monsoon season, my own neighborhood's not very green. So, and I have a 4-year-old who spends 12 hours a day looking to get hurt. So, Mike, I'm just wondering, especially with the growth, Shadow Ridge High School and Zen Trails out there, I'm just wondering if there is a time frame for that station.
No, but no's not a negative answer. Tonight, no, because we felt the next available sources of funding, grant and otherwise, should be the engine in the center of the city, because that strengthens the whole system when multiple calls for service occur. If the 309 neighborhood needs a response, is it coming from the neighborhood? No, but you really want the second due unit to be available and not be on other calls elsewhere. The chief and his planning chiefs know, we've had long conversations. Those stations will not build in numerical order. They will build by opportunity, cost, and availability. So the money to staff the next company past 305 is a factor. And then as you work with the development, which impact fees, maybe a land a good site, but a land deal is proffered the city, and there's multiple factors the city planning team and the department look at. And the good news would be maybe you're in a beauty contest some future budget cycle and you're looking at staffing too and trying to decide which one. And staff will come to you with some of those multiple factors weighted. We need help over here first for these reasons. And the purpose of a technical master plan is to give you those factors. No one measure is going to tell the whole story. You need to look at workload. You need to look at distance. You need to look at land, utilities, and micro growth patterns. So if that area really blossoms quick, the chief will be the first knocking on your door to say, hello, I realize in the fall of 17, we said 305 is it, but it's now summer of 18, and the pace of development's now exceeding staff's projections. It's taking our breath away. We need to do something. So leave that thought open. It's not 6, 7, 8, 9, or excuse 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's what best fits your needs and ability to pay.
Okay, and just reason being, you guys do an outstanding job. And I just want to make sure we are committed to making sure it stays that way. Because here we all want growth and all this, but there's no substitute for safety.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Duffy, we appreciate your comments and your observations. One of the things I can tell you now that over the last few months since we had we've implemented the peak time response unit 305, it's the 40-hour engine company, where we predicted that they would be there to fill in when ladder 305 was out. We're seeing a large percentage of their calls actually are going into some of the other areas like Station 303, 307, 302's area, backfilling for them while they're out on another call. So when we have the stacked call situation that Stu was talking about earlier, we're seeing that engine's actually providing a lot of coverage in the rest of the city as opposed to just in Station 305's area, which is what I originally had anticipated. They would be filling in the gap for when ladder 305's out of service, which they are doing, but they're spending a great deal of time in Station 302, 303, and 307's area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just real quickly to both Councilmember Hall and Councilmember Duffy's point, I want to refer back to the heat map, and you're talking about not necessarily growing in terms of numerical order of when we have needs, but when you look at the heat map, you also think about the changes that it can occur in an existing neighborhood when groups are aging in place. And we know that the consistent number of calls are going to those of us who are of seasoned population, and that is a significant portion of those calls are going to be going to that. And as we try to help facilitate having more and more of our community that are age-restricted communities are aging in place, we're going to have more calls, and we may have 2 stations, but we still are going to have need that are going to be coming in. And so there needs to be, I think we all need to be aware that that is a consistent factor that we're going to have to take into consideration. It's not just the 4-year-olds that are looking for trouble. It's the ones that get up out of bed and they barely make it to the bathroom before they're in trouble.
And those are 2 extreme examples. So Mayor, your point's spot on target. We didn't include it in the PowerPoint. And to a degree in the document, your chief and EMS staff are very much up on what's going on in emergency medicine economics. Long story short, low acuity patients are using the 911 system as healthcare of the only resort. It is a tremendously taxing, draining problem on 911, also on hospital emergency rooms. Hospital administrators will talk your ears off about how where they're really hemorrhaging loss is in low acuity patients by 911 or self-driving to the ER when all they needed was a later in the same day clinic appointment because they don't have a primary care provider. The future of this department and others will be to actually stabilize and lower acute 911 responses and come up with adaptive, non-emergent, healthcare-based, maybe city-vended teams, a person, a two, and an SUV who can do things, a dispatch center that can triage your call out of 911 to a healthcare nurse who can arrange a same-day clinic appointment, and in some systems, early pilot tests even by Uber. We'll get a senior dial-a-ride van to the corner of walk and don't walk. If you can get 2 blocks, we'll get somebody to take you there on the dial-a-van route. We'll pay for an Uber. I literally had AMR tell me 2 weeks ago, if AMR could stop going to some of the unnecessary calls, it would be it would be more cost effective for AMR to literally pay Uber out of their own profit pocket than to put more critical care paramedic teams on the streets. So the industry is shifting. It will primarily follow federal healthcare reform, something that the chiefs and my industry are keenly following, because we finally had a breakthrough 2 Fridays ago. Anthem became the first national medical insurance provider to say, starting in 2018, they would actually reimburse for alternative pathway emergency care. And we've been waiting for that because today, the only way to get the federal and state governments to pay a medical care bill in 911 is to literally have a box licensed as an ambulance with credentialed caregivers on it. So until we re-incentivize the economics, the chief can dream up better neighborhood solutions, but he'll be coming here to ask the general fund to pay for them until those can be billed to third-party insurance.
Makes sense. Thank you. All right, I think we can go forward with the next part of the presentation then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council, my name is Sam Spiegel, and I have your police portion of this presentation tonight. You're going to see a lot of similarities between police and fire, but we're also going to see some very distinct differences. We'll dispense, and Stu was gracious enough. I didn't hear one donut joke, so I'll leave out all of the. It
said donut bowl.
You did. Okay, I'll leave out the lounger side of things. One of the distinct differences between our two services, and one of the commonalities is, of course, we're all about public safety. Along with that public safety comes quality of life and surprise. And that's what this community is really known for. That's what the community expects. You've got a high level of service, and you've also got a high quality of life here. That's the true measurement. Safe community, emergency response, and all the supporting departments that make up that totality of service to the community. What is distinctly different is you've had a lot of conversation about how you handle the coverage with fire stations, because primarily the response of fire is from a fixed location. It may be out of an area, but it is normally from a fixed location with a, as we term it, standard of coverage. Law enforcement, on the other hand, is different. We set up beat boundaries that the chief and his staff have looked at. You look at areas that you want your patrol officers to be in, and those are modified and turned around a lot based upon your calls for service and type of crime or calls for service activity. The challenge with that is it's constantly moving. And so the police department does an outstanding job of looking at that. They look at that in their scheduling, and they look at that in their deployment. So for me today, make sure I'm with you here. The master plan before you is the first, as was mentioned earlier. It's the first for the police department. But what we decided to do at the request of the chief was to examine response time, crime, calls for service, and the staffing of the support functions and patrol to determine the adequacy of what you have now and going forward. The biggest challenge, of course, and it's a challenge for the council as it is with anything that comes before you, is to balance that level of service with fiscal capabilities. And as we go forward with this study, it's important to also point out to you that this is a continuous quality tune-up. Your police department's doing an outstanding job. We didn't find anything to come in and say, yeah, you've got a real problem here that needs to be addressed. That's not the case. And given that there has not been a strategic plan, this has been a great foundation to build on and look forward with. Year to year, you're going to make tweaks to this. And I will encourage you as we go through the recommendations in here, and I'll repeat it multiple times. It will be important to come back to the city manager and to your chief to collaboratively come back before you. And although we've suggested a priority of actions to occur, as things evolve in the city, as your population grows, as the ebb and flow of development changes, and as calls for service change and crime patterns change, those priorities may very well change. And so it's important to get that feedback. Our first and lasting impressions, as you've seen in the slide, you've got a wonderfully committed and dedicated workforce. The people that we interviewed are enthusiastic, both about the community and their jobs. But staffing's not kept pace with the growth of population and your service demands, and you've seen that in the technical side of the police report. The understaffing and vacancies have affected some key functions. We'll talk about that a little bit. Crime rate's being managed, and it's being managed well, but I want to caution the council not to be lulled into a level of comfort because of what has been maintained so far. You have an increase in traffic-related incidents, and we make some specific recommendations that address those in our study. First and foremost, unlike the medical side of things and some national best practices for fire, there are no mandatory federal or state regulations that say this is what your police response needs to be. The good and the bad of that is, for a community such as Surprise, you get to make that determination. You establish what that level of service is going to be, of course, in consultation with your chief and his staff to say to you, this is what we need to do to maintain this level of service. We look to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, CALEA, the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, for guidance in recommendations and best practices. In our analysis, you'll see we looked at existing staffing, the response times to emergencies, criminal activity, and community interaction. Also, the proactive and preventative patrol time. I'm going to talk about this in detail in just a few minutes. There is a expressed desire to continue to maintain your exceptional level of service, and you're fortunate to be able to be providing that. Also, there's performance measures and best practices that the study will also outline. So from a crime standpoint, it's a commendable job. You're minimizing crime, and given what's going on nationally, the police department's done a great job of keeping crime at its level, especially considering the slow economic rebound. In a lot of communities, there's been a significant increase in property crimes and also assault crimes. You're meeting your response time goals for the police department. The police department standard is an average of 5 minutes, and you are under that. We have made a recommendation in the study that going forward, that the city and the police department look at changing the evaluation of the response time so that it's the same as what fire service has done. However, with caution, and the chief shared this with me, the entire valley, all of law enforcement is using the same standard. And I know from my many years in government and listening to my city council, we want to see how we compare to other cities. And so if the standard for the police department in Surprise were changed all by themselves, it would be difficult to compare how you're doing relative to your neighboring agencies. In our workload assessment, we looked at the International Association of Chiefs of Police model of what we call 20-20-20. I introduced that to you because that is the best practices way that we can evaluate the workload of law enforcement. For years, and I did this in my very first strategic plan that I presented to my council in early 2000, we used to say, well, we need a staffing ratio of X number of officers per thousand population. And in today's world, with our ability to analyze and dissect the data that we have for what we're doing, it's not feasible and it's not defensible. It's a good backup. It's nice comparative. It's great to be able to look at a neighboring jurisdiction, say, well, they are 1.5 officers per thousand, or they are like some of our East Coast law enforcement agencies, 2.3 officers per thousand. But what is that being measured against? What are your performance objectives? How are you doing that? So the International Association of Chiefs took a look at it and said, here's the best way that we believe today you can look at law enforcement's work. Each hour should be divided into 3 20-minute blocks. You want to look at what your calls for service are, and 20 minutes of that hour minimally gets consumed by calls for service. 20 minutes for proactive time. That's the time that you do preventative and community interaction. Those types of things that the Councilmember Hall was talking about, with the community speaks so highly of their public safety in this community. That's not without all of the effort that's put forward in having that face-to-face communication with the community. The last 20 minutes is what we call administrative time. This is the most difficult to quantify. And as we look at the numbers that we've reported to you in the police department, that does not mean that there is available time, uncommitted time of 13 minutes in every hour, every police hour in the department. What we discovered was there's a lot of administrative time that isn't being documented. It's not being captured. And one of the biggest areas, and this is not unique to Surprise that we see, is report writing time. Unlike all of the shows on television, Hollywood would make us believe that a police officer gets the call, 911, gets dispatched, goes out, arrests, takes him into the jail, and then goes back out and takes the next call. Somewhere, somebody's got to do the dirty work, the paperwork. And that time is crucial to those calls. And as case law changes and as legislative changes occur, more and more has to be put into those reports. There's more notifications that have to be made. And so it's essential to capture that. Other things that normally are not captured, and this will take a little bit of cultural change within the department. As a street cop, I didn't want to be bothered with documenting all this other time that I do elsewhere. But through radio codes, an officer can code something over the radio. And if it gets entered into the CAD system, that now makes it retrievable in the future. So if there is some sort of a detail, something as simple as fueling the cars. Once a shift, hopefully, every officer is going to fuel the car. If that car is run 3 shifts a day, that's 3 times however many officers you've got. And then over the year, you start looking at if it's only 10 or 15 minutes. And I hope, in addition to fueling, so that your cars last a long time, we do check the oil. We don't just rely on a gauge. You probably got 15 minutes of fuel time a day. You start the shift by checking out a police car. You make sure everything's functioning. You don't want to wait until you go to turn the red lights or siren on and find out something is not functioning. All of this contributes to that administrative time, and so it's important that that time get captured. And going forward, what the chief and his staff will be using is this model to be able to show when you start getting over that 20-minute commitment in these areas, then you know as an elected body that other things are going to have to suffer. What does that mean? What are we going to pull back on? What adjustments are we going to make, or what are we going to do to address it so that we've got more time? These were the themes that we found. Challenges to maintaining the staffing levels, in part turnover, growing department, a maturing department. And so you've got injuries, you've got retirements. The traffic demands I mentioned earlier, you're having an increase in traffic collisions. And I can tell you that the direct result of that is a lack of enforcement. That does not mean tickets. Enforcement is what we refer to as the 3 E's: enforcement, education, and engineering. So the police department making a concentrated effort on looking at traffic. Sometimes an accident or a series of accidents can very well be attributed to the need of the cop sitting down with the city engineer and saying, there's something not working here. We're having a lot of accidents at this intersection. And, it's always a left turn violation. So what's the problem? Or if we've tried to educate the community, maybe we need to change the signalization. Maybe striping needs to be changed. All of those things enter into it, but you have to have committed workforce, additional committed workforce, working traffic. And while the chief has some now, we've made recommendations for that to increase also. Your communications and dispatch center has a lot of turnover, and they have specific training needs. And because of the staffing levels, it's challenging for them to get that training accomplished. Not unique to the city of Surprise. Every one of our clients in the last 2 years that I can think of, every comm center is faced with this. There's some creative things that we've talked about doing that will help with recruitment. The department's looked at those favorably, and I think that they'll be moving forward on some of those. For your records department, the FBI has changed how we're going to categorize what used to be called UCR crimes. Uniform Crime Reporting will now be called NIBRS, and law enforcement loves their acronyms. National Incident Based Reporting System, a lot easier to say NIBRS. With that change, it's going to facilitate a greater breakdown of what the crimes are in your community. So when the chief's reporting to you, this is what's happening with crime, an assault will be classified in a lot more detail, so you know what type of crime activity you're going to have. And it will allow for a greater comparison with neighboring jurisdictions, but more importantly, it will help the crime analyst and the shift commanders make a determination about deployment, because crooks know no boundaries. Just because your city limits are here doesn't mean that I'm in Surprise now, no crime here. They're going to cross over. So you're going to want to look at NIBRS reports from your neighboring jurisdictions. To that end, NIBRS is labor intensive. And in the study, we've made recommendation for additional person in records to assist with that. And there's going to be a need to fund the enhancement for the NIBRS module for the records management system. The last thing in this area of concern is we've made a recommendation for the department to consider adding community service officers or more community service officers. The community service officers in departments throughout the United States vary in duties, but for the purposes of explanation before this group, we're looking at a civilian who is trained in basic crime scene investigation and report writing, so that those types of things that are a report to document a theft from a garage, a car break-in where there is minimal physical evidence, or more appropriately said, where there is no suspect information, can very capably be handled by a civilian at significantly less money than a sworn gun-carrying police officer costs you. And by doing so, they're relieving the workload, and now we get back into our response times. We get back to that officer being available to respond to those calls and keep those response times down within your standards. Facilities, you heard this on the fire side too. The property evidence and equipment facilities need to be addressed. And I too will echo, hopefully by the end of your evening tonight, you'll have early enough returns to know how the community felt about that. We are suggesting that if in fact you are able to build the new facility, that you consider repurposing the old building. There is a need for a training site for the police department so they can facilitate the ongoing training that needs to occur, places where you can roll out mats, do safe defensive tactics, and also to provide sufficient classroom for that education. As far as equipment, we've made recommendations that you add specifically for motor officers to help with that enforcement education side of things, and a commercial enforcement officer. My experience in both communities that I served, I was in one of the fastest growing cities in Southern California in the 80s. And I was, in fact, the first commercial enforcement officer. We found that the more construction that we had going on, the more truck traffic we had. That's a no-brainer. But what you find is that truck drivers don't get paid hourly, they get paid by the load. And so it is essential to the safety of the community that you have somebody specifically trained in truck safety. It doesn't mean they got to be writing everybody tickets, but it does mean you want the city of Surprise to be known for the fact you're going to bring a big rig into our town. It's going to be in great operating condition. It's going to be safe. It's going to be able to stop. And its emissions are going to be appropriate. Its load's going to be safe. So that's where the commercial enforcement officer came. Information technology, we looked at a software system, as I mentioned earlier, for the RMS system. And we're encouraging the consideration of laptops for your investigative unit. It's an added tool. It's a tool of everybody. My backpack's got one in it. I don't go anywhere without it. And most of you have some sort of device that you're doing your work on a regular basis. We think that it's something that should be considered in the future for investigations. We put together this chart to try and bring it all together, and I want to again emphasize, this is the priority that we've suggested based on the here and now of what's going on in Surprise. On an annual basis, or at least regular basis, it is essential that the chief and the city manager collaborate, come back to you and say to you, based on our priorities of what we need now, coupled with your fiscal capabilities, this is the priority of what we should move forward now. So in this, first and foremost, in the priorities, we obviously said we need to fund and build the new evidence, property, and equipment storage facility, recommending that you repurpose the property evidence building today to a training facility. We're recommending that you add community service officers, records technician, and upgrade the NIBR, for the NIBR system. All of these can be varied. So it may be that the chief comes to you and says, you know what, as far as absorption and training, maybe I need to bring on a records clerk and maybe only 2 community service officers. And in the next funding cycle, we'll go look at an additional 2. All of those are open. Add your officers to the traffic unit as funding is available, and of course the motorcycles that you'll need for that. You need a commercial enforcement vehicle, not out of sight in cost. They run about the same as a patrol car will. Once outfitted, it'll be a little bit more because you'll have portable scales and some other things in there that are essential to the safety of the officer as well as the needed equipment. Going forward, add a sergeant to the traffic unit. Right now, the sergeant is sharing duties, other duties, and if you're going to put a strong focus on your traffic, remembering that it's more than enforcement, it's engineering and education. That sergeant has an administrative responsibility of coordination with the other city departments, and at the same time needs to ensure the specific training, constant training and retraining of your motorcycle officers to ensure that they're maintaining absolute safety habits and that they get their recurrent training on a regular basis. We've made recommendations for you to consider adding additional canine units. We talked about in the study that a dog specifically trained for search, as your population is aging, to have that ability to provide a search dog when you have a missing elderly person or sick person. Having that resource in your quiver is certainly important to have. As growth continues, you're going to need to look at adding a lieutenant watch commander to the graveyard patrol shift. Right now, you have a sergeant after a certain time of night that fills in as that manager. Of course, there is always someone available by phone, but as the workforce expands, having that managerial perspective and risk management thought process in addition to officer safety at a manager level is important. You'll also need to look at adding investigators assigned to your neighborhood response unit. They've had some great results with the work they're doing. But again, growth, normally people get focused on just solely patrol officers and patrol function, and both the administrative side, the support side of things, has to be looked at, as well as those other peace officer positions. Last but not least, I would talk to you about dispatch. With dispatch, we're in a little bit better position to kind of give you a threshold. And our communications team looked at this real close, and we've given you something to measure by in population. You know, when you're moving in increments of 6,780 population, and I hope to God none of you ask me to define how they came up with that, but they did. It's relative to the volume of calls for service that are generated by population. Calls for service into a 911 center don't necessarily translate to officers sent. So you'll have a much higher volume coming into the comm center than actually goes out in dispatch. Your next steps that we're recommending to you is to absorb the policy recommendations that we've made in the services assessment and adopt the updated performance measures. These will drive the deployment of police resources. Adopt and implement the report processes, the recording of these additional times for administrative time. And also we've talked with the chief about, as development continues to grow, adding additional information, dissecting that information from zoning and specific use types of commercial buildings. In other words, if you have an entertainment venue, if you have a restaurant that serves alcohol, if you have a restaurant that has after hours dance, classifying those and tracking the statistics of calls for service doesn't mean they're a problem location, but calls for service will give you a basis so that as your development comes further and somebody comes in with a specific plan and lays it down and says, gee, we're looking at building X number of homes here, and this is going to be this center, this commercial center here, and this is what we're going to put in. We'd like to put in a theater. We'd like to put this, that, and the other. The chief can project then, based on your history from the types of use, that, okay, we know that that's going to generate X calls for service. And now we take it all back to what I started with the 20-20-20, and say, how's that going to impact that time in calls for service? It'll give you a lot more information to work from. And then the last point here in the short term is to adopt standards for development guidelines so that those impacts will aid you in community safety, reduce the potential for calls for service. As those types of things that I relate to are those things such as building standards, those things that'll make harden the target, more specifically encouraging through guidelines and policies that there be CCTVs on certain types of commercial buildings, so that it's more of a proactive crime prevention. A lot of crooks are dumb, but most of them aren't stupid. So they look for a soft target. So if you're commercial and you're business people, their target has been hardened. There's cameras. There's a good dialogue as exists now with the police department with that. They'd rather move on to a softer target, move on to another community that has not worked as hard as you have to harden that target. And that's what we mean by those. In the long term, you want to look at adopting threshold for adding more police personnel. That is the analysis of that 20-20-20 information. It's also your communications impact with population growth. And then add the additional personnel. Ensure that the budget process includes supervisory and management personnel as we grow the bottom, so that you've got appropriate supervision, guidance, and risk management. All of this, of course, is dependent on your fiscal capability and the delicate balance that is entrusted to you for all of the other services that are needed citywide. With that, I'll just take questions.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. Great. As is the fire presentation, just great. I had a couple of questions though that came to mind, and I'd like to ask. First of all, I didn't hear any mention of the contribution that the Citizens Patrol in Surprise adds to our capability of policing within the city. And your evaluation of how that has impacted our need for officers per thousand or whatever, and what the impact of that has been, because we have a very active citizens patrol.
You do, and I apologize for not including it in this. Given our time frame, you will find in the study, it is actually articulated in the study and complemented that you have a rather large volunteer workforce, and that their efforts in supporting the department allows the department to have the reputation that it does. It is very supportive of the department, and I apologize for not including that in this brief presentation.
And that leads me to the question, the Citizens Patrol has certain things they can do and certain things they can't do. I know they can give somebody a ticket for parking too close to a fire hydrant by personal experience. But my question would be, do you see any expanded duties that could their role be expanded in any way, and would that help to alleviate some of the understaffing that we do have, or that we're perceived to have within the city?
I think I'd defer to the chief on it, because most of what I've seen, your volunteers are doing quite a lot now.
One of the things that has come to mind to me, we have a pretty robust park system, and it's going to become even more so as we have additional developments. We have one person who is a park ranger who polices all of the parks of the city at the present time, okay? And that's his main job, is to patrol those. However, it probably takes him a good 8 hours just to drive from one to the other. So I thought that was possibly a role that could be expanded and might help with some of the problems that seem to arise from time to time.
Sure, Madam Chair, Councilman Remley. As you know, we're short on time, but I could spend quite a bit of time complimenting our Citizen Patrol and all of the things that they do. I meet monthly with the commander of Citizen Patrol and many of his staff, and we talk routinely about what their current tasks are and how we can always look for ways for them to do more and be involved in more. But some of the limitations come from, even though we have a very robust volunteer team, they are far busier than we might think. For example, the vacation watches that they do routinely, just keeping up on the numbers and being able to maintain those on the time frame that make them actually valuable already runs them pretty thin. But in regards to your one example for parks, for example, we do have one designated park ranger. However, we supplement that with not only Citizens Patrol, but also our sworn officers, all of which will patrol and maintain a visible presence around the parks when they have time. But great suggestion.
And one other comment I would make concerning the Citizens Patrol, I've received compliments from more than one of the vice presidents of banks in the city of Surprise for the work that they've done in moving the decoy cars around, and they wished me to transmit to you guys how appreciative they were of that. This is unlike most of the other cities in the area that Surprise does that. So the next question I had, because I had a couple of questions, on the fiscal year 18 recommendations, are these all really needed with the current population that we have within the next fiscal year?
The short answer to that is it depends. It depends on the priorities of this council, and more so it depends on your fiscal capability to do those things. We've put these forward as our recommended priorities by years, that in a perfect world, if you have the capability to do, this is what we would say in this order that you do. Well beyond the scope of our study, and I know you wouldn't be asking us to do that, it's not for us to prioritize your funding allocation. And there's a lot more information that you have that goes behind that decision. Suffice it to say that I feel very confident that Chief Young is not at all abashed about coming before you, that if something was so urgent from a safety standpoint that it was negatively affecting quality of life and safety to this community, you'd know it, and you'd know that something is essential that they get immediately.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question for Chief Young. We talked about the K-9 units. How many K-9 units do we have in the city of Surprise?
Madam Chair, Councilman Winters, we have two, but one of our officers recently retired, so we're in the process for refilling that role. So we currently actively are using one, but we have two K-9 officers.
So you really do need more K-9 units.
So, Madam Chair, Councilman Winters, it has been one of the topics of conversation as we grow, as revenues allow. It is one of the things that strategically we've been looking at as we move forward. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Again, thank you from all of us for all that you've done to put together a really a comprehensive plan for all of us to mull over.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. On behalf of Citygate, we appreciate the opportunity to be able to serve the city of Surprise. And as you know, from 10 years prior, being able to come back, and we thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you so much. All right. That, I believe, is the last item on the agenda for our workshop, which we have gone well over time. To the members of the public, it's now 6:12, and the council has been sitting here for 2 solid hours plus a quarter. And so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be right back to start the meeting. So I appreciate your patience with us. Just we need a little human break here. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion, we adjourn the workshop.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.